My name is Arthur Jensen, and for 50 years I've carried a silence inside me that's heavier than any stone. I'm 78 now, and I've lived my whole life here in Harmony Creek. Most folks know me as the man who stood on the church steps after the big tornado of '74, trying to put names to faces and faces to homes that weren't there anymore. They see the retired postal worker, the widower who rebuilt on the same patch of dirt where his childhood home was swept away. But what they don't see, what I never spoke of, is the mistake I made in the quiet that followed the storm. I stood there as a symbol of our town coming together, a young man organizing the chaos with a crumpled piece of paper and a flashlight. Yet I carry the deep and abiding regret that my own inaction, my own belief in a unity I thought was unbreakable, helped sow the seeds for the very divisions I see tearing us apart today. My greatest failure wasn't in the face of the wind, it was in the stillness afterward. You have to understand what it was like. Before the tornado, the loudest thing in Harmony Creek was the train at dusk. But on that day, it was the siren. Not the wail itself, but the moment it stopped. That's what I remember most. The world went completely silent, and the sky turned a color I've never seen since, a sickly, bruised green. It was the color of something terrible being born. When it was over, the silence that fell was even worse. It wasn't peaceful. It was a heavy, dead-air quiet, broken only by sounds you never want to hear. That night, sitting on those cold, cracked church steps, the flashlight beam cutting through a darkness so total it felt like it had weight, reading names of neighbors to see who was accounted for, that's my anchor. It's the moment I became part of something bigger than myself. And it's the moment that has haunted me ever since because I thought that feeling, that bond we forged in the rubble was permanent. I was wrong. I was 28, sorting mail in the back of the old post office, the same job I'd hold for 40 more years. It was a Tuesday in April, ordinary in every way. The air that afternoon, though, felt different, heavy, still. You could almost taste the metal in it. When the siren started, it wasn't just a sound, it was a physical thing that shook the dust from the rafters. We all huddled in the basement, a place that smelled of damp concrete and old paper. The roar that came next, it wasn't like a train passes. This sound consumed everything. It was a physical pressure that vibrated in your bones, a grinding, splintering fury that went on for an eternity that was probably only a few minutes. When we came back up, the world was gone. The post office was still standing, miraculously, but my street, my house where my mother's roses were just about to bloom, it was just a field of splinters. We lost everything but the clothes on our backs. That first night, nobody was thinking about who was in charge or what came next. We were just survivors. The concept of property lines or fences had been erased by the wind. People who had lost everything were being taken in by strangers whose homes were barely standing. I found myself drawn to the church, or what was left of it. The steeple was gone and one wall was completely sheared off, but the steps were there. They became our town square, our meeting point. Someone handed me a flashlight and a notepad that had been salvaged from the town clerk's office, and just like that I had a job. I wasn't a leader. I was just the kid with the light and the paper. We shared bottles of water, stale crackers, and blankets that smelled of cedar chests. There were no arguments. There was no us and them. There was only we. We were Harmony Creek, huddled together in the dark, trying to count our own. The beam of that flashlight felt like the only solid thing in the world. It would cut through the darkness and land on a face, and for a second I'd see a flicker of hope or a wave of utter despair. I'd call a name, Henderson. Is anyone from the Henderson family here? And a voice would call back from the shadows, we're here, Art, we're okay. That little victory was everything. In that light, I didn't see the bank president or the gas station attendant. I saw neighbors. I saw the people I'd known my whole life, stripped of everything but their own humanity. And I, in my youthful ignorance, believed that this was the real us. I thought the tornado had ripped away the superficial things and revealed a core of unbreakable unity. I was so sure, so naively certain, that we would carry this bond forward, that we could rebuild not just our homes, but a better, closer community. I saw it as a terrible, beautiful gift. That belief was my biggest mistake. But the real anchor, the memory that's burned behind my eyes, isn't about the storm itself, it's about the humming. It happened on the third night, I think. The adrenaline had worn off and the deep, bone-aching exhaustion had set in. A cold drizzle started, making the rubble slick and the air smell of wet ash and earth. A child somewhere in the darkness near the church's broken altar began to cry. It wasn't a loud cry, but a thin, hopeless wail that seemed to voice what we all felt. The sound hung there for a moment, and the whole camp went quiet, listening to this small measure of our collective misery. Then from another corner, a woman started humming. I later learned it was Eleanor Gable, the school librarian. It was just a low, simple lullaby, a sound so fragile it felt like it could be extinguished by a breath. But then another voice joined in, and another. Soon a quiet chorus of humming filled the night, a sound not of joy but of stubborn shared existence. It didn't fix anything, but it pushed back the darkness just enough. I sat there, my flashlight beam nearly dead, and I felt it in my chest, an unbreakable human cord. That feeling, that certainty, lasted less than 48 hours. The first big supply truck arrived from the state, loaded with plywood, tarps, and roofing nails, and with it came our first real test. I was standing near the truck, my notepad now a chaotic list of needs, when I saw it begin. Jedediah Stone and Hank Hemlock, two men whose families had been sharing the same salvaged army blanket for 3 nights, were standing over a stack of plywood. Jedediah's farmhouse was a crater. Hank's roof was sitting in his kitchen. Their need was equal, but there were only 10 sheets of plywood on that first pallet. Their voices weren't loud at first, just tight with a new kind of fear. The fear of being left behind not by God or nature, but by their neighbor. "My kids are sleeping in the mud, Hank," Jedediah pleaded. Hank, his face grim, just pointed at his own wife and children huddled nearby. "So are mine, Jed." And then they both looked at me, the kid with the list, the one who had been calling out the names in the dark. They were looking for a decision, for fairness. And I, the boy who believed in the humming, froze. I said nothing. I thought, this will pass. We're all just tired. They didn't work it out. There was no grand argument, no fight. It was quieter and 1,000 times worse. Jedediah just looked at Hank for a long moment, his face a mask of hurt that went deeper than any loss of property. He turned, gathered his family, and walked away from the truck, away from the wood and away from his neighbor of 20 years. Hank didn't call after him. He just loaded 5 sheets of plywood onto his wheelbarrow with a grim, hollow victory on his face. That night, the camp was divided. The Gables were on one side, the Stones on the other. A line had been drawn, not by the tornado, but by a stack of wood and my own cowardice. The humming was gone, replaced by a silence that was heavier than any rubble. The tornado had destroyed our homes, but my silence in that moment had given everyone permission to start tearing down the community. That's the real memory I carry, not the roar of the wind, but the deafening quiet of a bond breaking while I just stood by and watched. For years, decades even, I told myself that my silence was a form of strength, that I was keeping the peace, letting tired and broken people find their own way. But that's a lie you tell yourself when the truth is too heavy to carry. The truth is, I was a coward. I was a boy who had been given a flashlight and a notepad and had mistaken it for authority, for wisdom. In that critical moment when the first crack appeared in our fragile, beautiful unity, I did nothing. My silence wasn't peace. It was a void. And into that void, suspicion and resentment rushed in. I can still see Jedediah's face, not angry, but wounded, as if he'd just discovered that the brotherhood we'd all felt was a figment of his imagination. I let him believe that. Every time I sorted mail, every time I walked past Hank's perfectly repaired house, I felt that moment again. The silence I chose became a wall inside of me, and I've been living behind it ever since. It's a cold, lonely place. The worst part is watching what came next. That single crack became a spiderweb of fractures. It was never about the plywood, it was about the precedent. The unspoken rule became, look out for your own. The shared meals dwindled. The late-night talks by the fire stopped. People started putting up fences again, not just around their new yards, but around their hearts. We rebuilt Harmony Creek, sure. We got new houses, a new school, a new church steeple. But we rebuilt it on a foundation of quiet, unresolved hurt. I watched it happen from behind the counter at the post office, handing out letters and packages, a silent observer to a slow-motion collapse. And the whole time, a voice in my head screamed, "What if you had said something? What if you had just reminded them of the humming?" But I didn't. The guilt wasn't a sudden storm, it was a slow erosion, wearing me down from the inside year after year until the man who sat on those church steps felt like a stranger from another life. Now I see it happening again. I hear the same tight, fearful tones in the voices of young people at the diner, arguing about this new development plan. They draw lines, they choose sides, and they look at each other with that same look of wounded betrayal I saw on Jedediah's face. And the old fear, the one I buried under 50 years of routine and regret, is clawing its way back up my throat. I'm afraid that I'm still that same boy on the church steps, paralyzed by the fear of saying the wrong thing, of making it worse. My failure wasn't just a historical event, it's a living part of me. It's the scar tissue around my heart that aches whenever I see a neighbor turn their back on a neighbor. The pain I carry isn't just about the past. It's the terrifying realization that my oldest mistake is about to become our town's newest tragedy. And I still don't know if I have the courage to finally speak up. And now, 50 years later, the wind is rising again. Not in the sky, but in the heart of this town. Harmony Creek is beautiful now. The houses are sturdy, the lawns are green, and the church has a brand new steeple that gleams in the sun. But it's a fragile beauty, like a perfectly painted dollhouse with nothing inside. A developer wants to buy the old public lands by the creek, and suddenly the town I thought we rebuilt is cracking at the seams. The arguments aren't in town hall meetings. They're whispered with venom in the aisles of the grocery store, shouted across social media pages where neighbors become strangers with keyboards. I see people I've known my whole life looking at each other with a coldness that scares me more than any storm cloud. Back then, the tornado stripped us down to our shared humanity. Now it feels like prosperity has built the walls back up, higher and stronger than before. After the storm, we didn't have opinions. We had needs: hunger, thirst, a dry place to sleep. Nobody asked if you voted for this person or that, or what you thought about the town council. They just saw a neighbor in need and extended a hand. We were all on the same side, the side of survival. But listen to them now. It's all about sides. It's about winning this fight over the development, proving the other side wrong, as if being right is more important than being neighbors. They talk past each other, armed with their own facts, their own certainties. They've forgotten that the ground beneath their feet, the very land they're fighting over, was once a place where we were just grateful to be alive together. They've forgotten the simple, desperate math of survival. You can have a perfect opinion all by yourself, but you can't rebuild a town alone. That instinct, to see the person before the argument, is gone. We lost it somewhere along the way. The other day I was at the diner and I saw it happen. Sarah, a girl I used to deliver birthday cards to, was arguing with her own uncle, a man who taught her how to ride a bike. Her voice was sharp, and his face was a mask of wounded pride. In that instant, I wasn't in the diner anymore. I was back on those church steps watching Jedediah Stone turn his back on Hank Hemlock. It was the same look, the same terrible, quiet heartbreak of a bond snapping, and I finally understood. Unity doesn't die in a big explosion. It dies quietly in 1,000 little silences, in the moments we choose to turn away instead of turning toward each other. My silence back then wasn't a single mistake. It was the first crack in the dam, and now, watching Sarah and her uncle, I can feel the floodwaters rising, threatening to wash away what little we have left. That's when I made a decision. It wasn't a grand, heroic choice. It was the quiet, terrifying decision to finally stop being the boy on the steps. I looked at Sarah, her face flushed with anger and hurt, and I saw Jedediah Stone's ghost standing right behind her. I saw 50 years of my own cowardice reflected in her eyes, and I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core that I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't bear to watch another generation inherit my silence. So I pushed myself up from my booth, my old bones protesting, and walked over. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have the right words. All I had was the weight of my mistake. I didn't interrupt her. I just waited until there was a pause, and then I looked at her not as a combatant in a town debate, but as the little girl I once knew. "Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse, "can I tell you a story? It's about a mistake I made a long, long time ago, a mistake I think I'm seeing again." She didn't agree right away. She looked at me, her guard up, expecting me to take her uncle's side. But I didn't. I just stood there waiting. Finally, she nodded. We sat down in a booth away from the others, and I told her everything. I told her about the humming in the dark and the hope I felt, and then I told her about the plywood, about Hank and Jedediah, and about the silence that cost us everything. I confessed my own failure. I didn't tell her who was right or wrong about the development. I just told her that the cost of winning an argument is sometimes the community itself. She listened. The anger on her face softened into something else, something thoughtful. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, "He taught me how to fish right in that creek they want to sell." She didn't say she'd changed her mind. She just said, "I'll call him tonight. I'll talk to him." And in that small, fragile promise, I felt a lifetime of regret begin to lift. The time hadn't healed my wound, but it had finally validated the lesson. You don't rebuild a community by being right. You rebuild it by being brave enough to bridge the silence. And now I'm looking at you. I don't know your life, and I don't know the name of your town, but I know you have a Harmony Creek. We all do. And I'm willing to bet you have a storm brewing too. It might not be a tornado that darkens the sky. Maybe it's just a quiet, stubborn disagreement with a brother, a friend, or a neighbor over something that feels impossibly important right now. Think of that person, the one whose name brings that familiar tight knot of tension to your chest. You probably stopped talking, haven't you? Or if you are talking, you're no longer listening to each other. You're just reloading your arguments, waiting for your turn to prove your point, to land the final winning blow. I'm asking you to stop for a moment and ask yourself one hard question, the one I was too afraid to ask for 50 years. Is your silence, or your desperate need to be right, making the gap between you wider? Is it building a wall where a bridge used to be? Don't let the quiet between you curdle into a silence that lasts a lifetime. The ground beneath your feet feels solid today, but trust an old man. It is always more fragile than you think. Here is the only lesson I have, the one I paid for with half a century of regret. Don't wait for a real storm to tear down all the walls just so you can see each other's humanity again. Choose to see it now, while the sun is still shining. Make the quiet, difficult decision to be the one who rebuilds the bridge. Pick up your phone, send the message, knock on that door, not to win, not to have the last word, just to let them know the person is more important than the point. You have no idea how powerful those simple words can be. I was thinking about you. Are you okay? I miss talking. That is the humming in the dark. That is the flashlight beam cutting through the rubble. That is the first step away from the cold, lonely victory of being right and back toward the messy, beautiful, necessary work of being a community. My name is Arthur Jensen, and for 50 years I was the man who watched a town break because of a stack of wood and my own fear. I'm asking you with all my heart to be braver than I was.